Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're diving straight into The Global Catalyst, a concise history of World War I. We're going to break down exactly how this totally unprecedented conflict essentially rewired the modern globe in just a handful of years, shattering old empires and completely changing the face of warfare forever. So let's jump right in.
Now, you might be wondering, how did one single spark manage to set the entire world on fire? Well, we have to rewind to Europe in the summer of 1914. And look, it was absolutely not a peaceful place. It was a ticking time bomb. You had decades of intense, bitter imperial rivalry and just massive militarism building up this unbelievable pressure cooker across the continent.
Basically, Europe had carved itself up to these secretive, rigid alliances into two massive, heavily armed camps. You had the Triple Entente, which was Britain, France, and Russia, squaring off against the Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary. And the crazy thing about these tangled treaties is that an attack on one nation was literally considered an attack on all of them.
And that brings us to the match that finally lit the powder keg, June 28, 1914. It started as the seemingly isolated incident in Sarajevo, where a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne.
What really should have just been a localized crisis escalated into a horrifying chain reaction, and at lightning speed too. Within weeks, Austria-Hungary goes after Serbia. Then Russia mobilizes to back Serbia. Germany jumps in to support Austria-Hungary. France and Britain get pulled in by their own treaties. And just like that, in a mere 6 weeks, all the major powers are at war. The whole shebang, completely out of control.
Okay, so the war is on. Germany's grand strategy was the Schlieffen Plan. They were banking on a lightning-fast strike to take Paris and knock France out of the picture quickly, so they could then pivot all their forces east to fight Russia. But, military plans rarely survive actual combat. Their rapid invasion violently stalled out right near the Marne River, completely killing their momentum.
With that momentum dead in its tracks, the entire nature of the war shifted. 400. That's a number you really have to try and wrap your head around. 400 miles. That was the length of the Western Front. This massive, sprawling network of damp, disease-ridden trenches stretching all the way from the Swiss border to the North Sea. Millions of guys just dug into the mud for 4 agonizing years.
And so, they lived and died in this absolute horrific stalemate. They spent years just staring across no man's land, which was this bleak, heavily fortified nightmare strip separating the opposing trenches. Honestly, if you even tried to step into that impassable stretch of dirt, you were instantly met with a terrifying wall of defensive fire.
You see, this was the world's very first true industrial war. The old 19th century way of fighting, like literally sending guys on horseback for cavalry charges, was suddenly colliding headfirst with a devastating 20th century reality. We're talking modern machine guns, heavy artillery, toxic poison gas, early tanks, flamethrowers. Traditional tactics just completely collapsed against this new, terrifying arsenal.
To really put the sheer horror of that modern weaponry into perspective, think about this. 2 million casualties. That is the staggering, combined human toll of just 2 battles, the Somme and Verdun. 2 million men, killed or wounded, fighting over mere yards of mud. It's just a brutal showcase of the deadly efficiency of industrial warfare.
Now, we definitely need to zoom out for a second, because we can't forget that this wasn't just a European war. It dragged in global empires. Ottoman forces were battling the Allies in the Middle East. You had colonial troops from India, regiments from Africa, and forces from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand fighting across multiple continents. This conflict literally spread across the entire globe.
1917, the turning of the tide.
By 1917, an unbelievable exhaustion had set in worldwide. Russia was battered, totally torn apart by internal revolution, and actually signed a separate peace with Germany and dipped out of the conflict entirely. So, with Russia gone, a German victory honestly seemed possible. That is, until Germany made 2 catastrophic blunders. First, they resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking American merchant ships. Then, the Allies intercepted the infamous Zimmermann telegram. Those 2 moves forced the United States into the fight, injecting massive industrial power and desperately needed fresh troops right into the Allied cause.
And that was the beginning of the end. Faced with all this overwhelming American reinforcement, plus a total economic collapse back home, the German war machine basically fractured from the inside out. In 1918, a massive German offensive failed completely. The Allies hit right back with the relentless 100 Days Offensive. Meanwhile, the German economy was in shambles, and their navy was dealing with widespread mutinies. The whole system just broke down.
Which brings us to a date I'm sure you recognize. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. The armistice took effect, and those heavy guns finally fell silent across Europe.
But wow, that silence came at a human cost that is almost impossible to comprehend. 20 million dead, 21 million wounded. It completely shattered an entire generation and forever altered global demographics and the human psyche. The scale of the tragedy is just unprecedented.
And beyond that devastating human toll, the geopolitical map was totally ripped up. Centuries of entrenched power? Gone. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires completely collapsed, abruptly giving us the borders of the modern world we live in today.
So, to wrap up our explainer today, we really have to look objectively at what happened next. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles hit Germany with extremely harsh financial penalties and massive territorial losses. And knowing how those conditions ultimately planted the seeds for severe economic turmoil, it leaves us with one haunting question. Did the Treaty of Versailles actually end a world war, or did it just hit pause before the next one? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.